Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku married Malenia? Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air tasted of ash, ozone, and a metallic tang of blood. Ruins stretched out in every direction, the skeletal remains of a city that had once been the beating heart of Japan. Now, it was nothing more than a graveyard of twisted rebar, pulverized concrete, and shattered glass. Above it all, the sky was a bruised, apocalyptic violet, choked by the dust of falling buildings and the sheer, overwhelming pressure of the battle raging below. Izuku Midoriya, hero name Deku, gasped for breath. His lungs burned as if he were inhaling shattered glass. His costume, the once bright green hero suit his mother had made and upgraded time and time again, was torn to shreds, stained crimson with his own blood and black with soot. The iron soles of his boots felt as heavy as lead. His arms, wrapped in protective compression gear, pulsed with a deep, agonizing ache. The old scars, jagged and lightning-shaped, throbbed in time with his racing heart. A few dozen yards away, floating amidst a maelstrom of decaying matter and telekinetic debris, was Tamura Shigaraki. The villain's white hair whipped wildly in the unnatural wind generated by their clashing powers. Shigaraki's eyes were wide, manic, filled with the all-consuming hatred of All for One. "Is this it, Izuku Midoriya?" Shigaraki roared, his voice distorted, layered with the echoes of 100 stolen quirks. "Is this the limit of your borrowed power?" Deku didn't answer. He couldn't afford to waste a breath. Inside his mind, the vestiges, the previous users of One for All, were shouting, their voices a chaotic chorus of warnings and tactical advice. "He's charging a localized decay wave." The first user, Yoichi, warned. "Focus, ninth! Bring out Black Whip! Bind his arms!" Daigoro Banjo bellowed. "No, he'll just decay the whips," and the sixth user countered. "You need raw power." Now, Deku planted his feet. Emerald lightning, crackling with intense, violent energy, erupted from his skin. One for all, full cowl, 100%. The sheer force of the energy output tore the remaining ground beneath him to dust. Deku crouched low, his muscles screaming in protest. He had to end this. If Shigaraki unleashed his decay at full power right now, everything behind Deku, the evacuation shelters, his friends, the remaining heroes, would be turned to dust. "I won't let you!" Deku screamed in his mind. "I will save them!" Shigaraki lunged, a massive, grotesque hand made of raw, mutated flesh and black lightning spiraling toward Deku. At the exact same moment, Deku kicked off the ground, breaking the sound barrier. The air shattered around him with a deafening boom. He pulled his right arm back, the muscles bulging, glowing with a brilliant, blinding light. Detroit. Smash! Fist met flesh. The raw, stockpiled life force of One for All collided head-on with the entropic, destructive singularity of All for One and decay. For a fraction of a second, the world went completely still. There was no sound. There was no wind. Then, reality broke. It didn't explode, it tore. A jagged fissure in the fabric of space ripped open at the exact point of their collision. It was a terrifying vortex of colors that defied human comprehension, a kaleidoscope of vantablack, blinding white, and sick, neon hues. The gravitational pull was instant and absolute. Deku felt himself being dragged forward. He tried to deploy Black Whip to anchor himself to the ground, but the ground was already gone, sucked into the rift. Shigaraki was screaming, thrashing against the pull, using his rivet stab to anchor himself to the remaining bedrock. Deku had no such anchor. "Midoriya!" A voice screamed from the distance. It sounded like Bakugo. Or maybe Todoroki. Before Deku could turn his head, the rift swallowed him whole. The jaws of space snapped shut, and the ruined city of Japan vanished. Cold. That was the first sensation. A damp, biting cold that seeped immediately into his bones. The second sensation was vertigo. The sickening, stomach-dropping realization that there was absolutely nothing beneath his feet. Deku's eyes snapped open. He expected to see the swirling vortex of the dimensional tear, or perhaps the void of space. Instead, he saw a sky that made no sense. It was a hazy, muted gold, heavy with fog and descending mist. There was no sun, no moon, no clouds. Just an oppressive, golden smog, and he was falling. Fast. The wind roared in his ears, whipping his messy green hair wildly around his face. Panic, sharp and icy, spiked in his chest, but years of grueling training and near-death experiences immediately overrode his fear. Assess the situation, he thought rapidly, his analytical mind kicking into overdrive. I'm in freefall. Terminal velocity approaching. Below me. He twisted his body midair to look down. His breath caught in his throat. Beneath him was not a city of concrete and glass, nor a landscape of mountains and rivers. It was a tree. But calling it a tree felt like a gross understatement. It was a colossal, impossible structure of nature and architecture combined. Branches the size of skyscrapers stretched out into the misty abyss. Woven into these massive limbs were sprawling, Gothic structures, bridges of pale stone, towering flying buttresses, majestic courtyards, and grand, sloping roofs. It was a city built into the embrace of a titan of wood, but as grand as it was dying. Even from this height, Deku could see the sickness. The leaves that clung to the branches were a pale, sickly gold, and massive swathes of the wood were covered in a repulsive, bubbling crimson fungus. The very air rising from the structure smelled sweet and putrid, like overripe fruit left to rot in the sun. I need to slow down, Deku concentrated. Float. He tapped into the quirk of the seventh user, Nana Shimura. Immediately, the terrifying acceleration of his fall ceased. He didn't stop completely. The momentum was too great, but his descent slowed to a manageable, drifting glide. His muscles ached fiercely, a lingering side effect of his clash with Shigaraki. He couldn't maintain float for long in his exhausted state. He needed a solid landing point, targeting a massive, sweeping stone bridge that connected two of the larger branches. Deku deactivated float and allowed himself to drop. When he was 50 feet above the masonry, black, tendril-like energy erupted from his arms. Black whip! The dark energy lines shot out like grappling hooks, wrapping securely around a gargantuan stone statue of a woman holding a bowl. Deku swung like a pendulum, bleeding off his kinetic energy before releasing the whips. He landed into a practice roll on the pale stone blocks of the bridge, sliding to a halt on one knee. Silence. Deku stayed completely still, his chest heaving, listening for any sign of pursuit. Nothing. The only sound was the distant, eerie rustle of the massive golden leaves and the faint dripping of condensation. Slowly he stood up. He brushed the dust from his shredded green pants and looked around. Where am I? He whispered. The architecture was unlike anything in Japan, or anywhere on Earth for that matter. It was impossibly grand, medieval yet refined, with intricate carvings of flora and somber figures decorating the balustrades. Statues of figures draped in robes lined the bridge, though many of them were defaced or overgrown with the strange, creeping red rot he had seen from above. Is this a quirk? He wondered, walking to the edge of the bridge and looking over. Below him, the abyss was obscured by the golden fog. Did Shigaraki's singularity send me somewhere else? A different continent? No. The sky, the air, this isn't Earth. A sharp, stabbing pain in his head made him wince. Danger sense. The quirk of the fourth user flared to life, vibrating like a tuning fork inside his skull. It wasn't the chaotic, overwhelming static of a villain's mass destruction. It was precise. Cold. Disciplined. They were surrounded. Deku dropped into his fighting stance, knees bent, arms raised, green lightning sparking to life around his body. One for all, full cowl, 8%. The ambient light of his quirk cast an eerie, emerald glow against the pale stone. From the fog at both ends of the bridge, figures began to emerge. They moved with a heavy, rhythmic clanking of armor. As they stepped into the dim light, Deku felt a chill run down his spine. They were knights, towering a full head taller than him. Their armor was breathtaking yet terrifying, forged of a dull, unalloyed gold that seemed to resist the dim light rather than reflect it. They wore majestic helms adorned with winged crests and crests of crimson hair, and their capes were tattered, stained with the same repulsive red rot that plagued the tree. In their hands they held weapons of execution. Some wielded massive, curved scythes that glinted wickedly, while others held slender, deadly rapiers paired with heavy golden shields. But what disturbed Deku the most was not their weapons or their size. It was the smell, and the way they breathed. Beneath the golden visors, Deku could hear a wet, rattling gasp. The crimson fungus, the rot, was not just on the environment. It was on them. Spores drifted from the gaps in their armor. These warriors were horribly diseased, decaying from the inside out. Wait! Deku called out, holding up a hand, powering down his quirk to show he wasn't looking for a fight. I don't want to fight. I'm lost. I was transported here by accident. Can you understand me? The knights did not speak. They did not shout a battle cry. They simply raised their weapons in eerie unison. Danger sense spiked again, a sharp needle of warning. The knight closest to him lunged. Despite the rattling breath and the obvious sickness, the knight moved with blinding speed. The golden rapier thrust forward, aimed directly at Deku's heart. Fast. Deku thought. He didn't try to block. He couldn't risk testing the durability of his arm guards against an unknown blade. Instead, he pivoted on his heel, letting the rapier slide harmlessly past his chest, the razor edge cutting a thin line through the fabric of his shirt. As the knight overextended, Deku grabbed the knight's wrist. The metal of the gauntlet was surprisingly warm, almost feverish. I said I don't want to fight. Deku gritted his teeth, applying leverage. He twisted his hips and threw the knight over his shoulder with a judo toss. The massive golden warrior crashed into the stone bridge with a heavy metallic clang. Deku didn't follow up with a strike. He stepped back, giving the knight room. Please! Let's talk. His mercy was met with immediate retaliation. From behind, a knight wielding a scythe swung the massive blade in a horizontal arc, aiming to decapitate him. Danger sense warned Deku just in time. He ducked, the wind from the heavy blade ruffling his hair. From his crouched position, Deku swept his leg out in a low arc, shoot style, striking the knight behind the knees. The armor was heavy, but the force of one for all sent the knight tumbling backward. They're skilled. Incredibly skilled, Deku's mind raced, analyzing their movements. Their center of gravity is low. Their attacks are coordinated. They aren't mindless monsters. They're an organized military force. But they're lethargic. The disease is slowing them down. If they were healthy, I might not be able to dodge that easily. 2 more knights charged, one from the left, one from the right. A coordinated pincer attack. I can't let them box me in. Deku activated smokescreen, the quirk of the 6th user. A massive cloud of thick, purple smoke erupted from his body, instantly blanketing the bridge in zero visibility fog. He heard the knights halt, their armor clinking as they braced themselves. They were disciplined. They didn't swing blindly into the smoke. I have to disarm them without hurting them, Deku thought, moving silently through his own smoke. They're just defending their territory. They think I'm an invader. I can't act like a villain. He dropped to the ground, sliding across the smooth stone beneath the knight's line of sight. He targeted the knight with the scythe. Bursting upward from the smoke, Deku channeled 15% of his power into his legs. Manchester smash. Instead of aiming for the knight's body, Deku brought his axe kick down directly onto the wooden haft of the scythe. The reinforced wood splintered and snapped under the sheer force of his kick. The knight staggered back, looking at the broken weapon in what Deku assumed was shock. Before the knight could recover, Deku fired Black Whip. The black tendrils wrapped around the knight's arms and torso, pinning them tight. Deku hurled the bound knight into another approaching soldier, knocking them both down like bowling pins. The smoke began to clear, blowing away in the sluggish breeze. Deku stood panting, surrounded by groaning, disarmed knights. He hadn't broken a single bone. He hadn't drawn a single drop of blood. He had merely incapacitated them, dismantling their formation with non-lethal precision. He looked at the fallen warriors. One of them, the one he had thrown first, was trying to push himself up. Deku saw a patch of armor that had broken away from the knight's neck during the fall. Beneath the gold, the flesh was a horrifying landscape of blooming red fungus and rotting tissue. Deku's eyes widened in horror and deep, instinctual sympathy. They're in agony. Every movement must be torture. Yet they still fight to protect this place. The knight looked up at Deku. Even through the blank golden visor, Deku could feel the confusion radiating from the soldier. The knight looked at his dropped sword, then at Deku, who was standing there, clearly powerful enough to have slaughtered them all, yet actively choosing to leave them alive. In the lands between, in the brace of the Halig tree, mercy was an alien concept. To defeat an enemy and leave them breathing was an insult, a mystery, a paradox. The knight slowly reached for a small horn at his hip and brought it to his helmet, blowing a single, mournful note that echoed up into the massive canopy above. Danger sense didn't just spike. It exploded. A wave of pain lanced through Deku's head, so intense he stumbled backward, clutching his temples. This wasn't the intent of an entire army. This was the intent of a single, localized entity. The aura of danger was so thick, so suffocatingly heavy, it felt like the gravity on the bridge had doubled. From the grand archway at the far end of the bridge, a shadow detached itself from the gloom. The remaining Cleanrot knights, those who could still stand, immediately dropped to one knee, bowing their heads in absolute, fanatic reverence. The rhythmic sound of footsteps echoed across the stone. Clink. Step. Clink. Step. One footstep was soft, booted leather. The other was the harsh, heavy sound of metal striking stone. Deku lowered his hands, his breath catching. He couldn't move. The sheer pressure of the approaching figure pinned him in place, much like the aura of All for One or the hero killer Stain, but somehow more refined, more ancient. The figure stepped into the ambient light of the bridge. She was incredibly tall, towering over even the imposing Cleanrot knights. She wore a dress of pale fabric, layered with tattered, rotting crimson cloth. But it was her armor that drew the eye. She wore a helm of unalloyed gold, fashioned with a sweeping pair of wings that framed her face, obscuring her eyes but revealing pale, cracked lips and a cascade of dull red hair. Her right arm, and both of her legs beneath the knee, were missing. In their place were exquisite, highly functional prosthetics made of the same unalloyed gold as her armor. The metal arm ended in an intricate gauntlet, and attached to that gauntlet was a blade. It was a katana of impossible length, easily as tall as Deku himself. The blade was a masterwork, catching the dim light and reflecting a cold, deadly promise. The metal of the blade seemed permanently fused to her prosthetic wrist. She did not draw the blade. She didn't need to. She simply was the blade. Deku swallowed hard. This is the leader. The ruler of this place. He immediately noticed the same red rot that afflicted the soldiers was ravaging her as well. Her visible skin was pale, mapped with dark veins and the creeping, blooming fungus of the scarlet rot. Yet she carried herself with a regal, indomitable grace. The disease had taken her limbs, but it had not touched her pride. The towering woman stopped a dozen paces from Deku. She did not look at her fallen knights. She kept her unseen gaze entirely on the boy in the torn green suit. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, raspy from disuse, yet it carried an undeniable, commanding authority. It resonated through the damp air, sending shivers down Deku's spine. She spoke in a language Deku had never heard before, guttural, ancient, and melodic all at once. Deku panicked for a moment. I can't understand her. The language barrier. Suddenly, a warm sensation bloomed in his chest. In the dark void of his mind, the vestiges stirred. The first user, Yoichi, stepped forward in the mental landscape. Do not fear, ninth, Yoichi's voice echoed gently. One for all has existed for over a century. We have absorbed the experiences, the minds, the very essence of many. Allow our collective consciousness to bridge the gap. Like a radio dial tuning into the correct frequency, the strange, ancient words leaving the woman's lips began to shift, translating in real time in Deku's mind. Strange combatant, the woman was saying. You wield no steel. You bear no crest. Yet you move with the speed of a falling star, and you shatter weapons with your bare limbs. Deku stood up straight, trying to look as unthreatening as possible, though he kept his core engaged, ready to dodge. I didn't want to hurt them, Deku said, his voice steady despite his fear. I'm a hero from my home. We don't kill. The woman tilted her head slightly. The wings on her helm shifted. Hero. She tested the word on her tongue as if it were a foreign, distasteful spice. A knight of a naive order. You strike my Cleanrot knights down, yet you leave them breath. Is it arrogance? Do you deem them unworthy of your killing blow? No, Deku said quickly, waving his hands. No, of course not. They're amazing fighters. I can see how hard they train. But they're suffering. I can see the disease on them. On you too. Why would I add to that suffering if I can avoid it? The bridge went deathly quiet. Even the groaning knights ceased their noise. To mention the rot so openly, with such blatant, unvarnished pity, was unthinkable. The woman's grip on her long blade tightened slightly. A microscopic shift in her stance made Deku's danger sense scream in pure agony. If she moved, he knew he would not be able to track her. She was on a completely different level of existence. Pity, the woman said softly, her voice carrying a dangerous edge. A rare commodity in the lands between. And a fatal one. It's not pity, Deku corrected, his green eyes meeting the dark visor of her helm. He didn't flinch. He channeled the unyielding spirit of all might. It's a fact. I am an outsider here. I trespassed. They defended their home. I respect that. I respect you for leading them. My name is Izuku Midoriya. I don't know where I am, but I surrender to you. Deku slowly powered down the last lingering sparks of One for All. He raised his hands, completely defenseless, offering himself as a prisoner. The knights around them shifted, their armor clinking in disbelief. A tarnished, or whatever this boy was, surrendering? Without a fight to the death? The woman stared at him. For a long, tense moment she weighed his words. She looked at his hands raised in surrender. Her unseen eyes lingered on his arms. The sleeves of his suit were completely shredded, revealing the horrific, jagged scars that spiderwebbed across his flesh. They were the scars of someone who had repeatedly destroyed his own body for the sake of his power. She recognized those scars. Not the shape of them, but the spirit behind them. They were the scars of a fanatic. Someone who believed in a cause so deeply that their own flesh was a secondary concern. She looked at her own prosthetic arm, the unalloyed gold gleaming in the mist. A kindred spirit, perhaps. Bizarre. Naive. But undeniably powerful. Slowly, the tension left her shoulders. The oppressive aura that had been crushing Deku dissipated into the fog. You are a fool, Izuku Midoriya, she said, her tone flat, yet devoid of the killing intent from moments before. To bare your neck in the haligtree is to invite the blade. Maybe, Deku smiled weakly, exhaustion finally catching up to him. The adrenaline was fading, leaving his muscles trembling and his vision blurring. But a hero always bets on people. The woman stared at him a moment longer. Then she turned her back to him. The tattered red cape billowed out behind her. Bind his wounds, but do not break his limbs, she ordered the cleanrot knights in a commanding tone. He is not a tarnished. He is something else. Confine him in the inner brace. I will interrogate him myself when the rot slumbers. The knights, recovering from their shock, moved to obey. Two of them approached Deku, warily, as if expecting him to explode. Deku didn't resist as they grabbed his arms. He was too tired. As they began to march him across the bridge, following the towering woman in the golden armor, he looked up at the massive, decaying branches of the tree above. Wait, Deku called out, his voice tired. I gave you my name. What's yours? The woman paused. She did not look back over her shoulder, but her voice carried clearly over the wind. I am Malenia, she said. Blade of Miquella. And I have never known defeat. She continued walking, disappearing into the shadows of the grand architecture. Deku, flanked by the diseased knights, followed her into the dark. He had faced monsters, madmen, and gods of destruction in his own world. But as he looked at the golden prosthetics of the woman leading him into the depths of the dying tree, he knew his journey, his true path to becoming the greatest hero, was just beginning in this rotting, beautiful world. The darkness of the haligtree swallowed him, and Izuku Midoriya finally let his exhaustion take over, slipping into unconsciousness. Consciousness returned to Izuku Midoriya not as a sudden awakening, but as a slow, agonizing crawl from the depths of a dark ocean. Before he opened his eyes, he took inventory of his body, a habit ingrained in him by years of breaking his own bones. His head throbbed with a dull, rhythmic ache, a hangover from the sheer amount of adrenaline and quirks he had channeled simultaneously. His chest felt tight, the bruised ribs protesting with every shallow breath. But it was his arms that screamed the loudest. From his shoulders down to his fingertips, a deep, burning phantom pain flared, the familiar, terrifying reminder of the physical toll one for all demanded when pushed past its absolute limits. He groaned, the sound dry and cracked in his throat, and finally forced his eyelids apart. He expected to see the sterile white ceiling of Recovery Girl's infirmary, or perhaps the cracked concrete of a makeshift triage center in the ruins of Jaka City. Instead, his vision swam with muted, opulent golds and deep, shadowy ambers. Deku blinked heavily, trying to clear the blur. He was lying on a bed. No, not a bed, a lavish chaise lounge draped in thick, embroidered silks that smelled faintly of old dust and something sickly sweet, like crushed lilies left out in the sun. He sat up, wincing as his abdominal muscles pulled. He looked down at himself. His ruined hero costume was mostly gone. The shredded green top, his heavy iron-soled boots, and his utility belt had been removed. He was left in his dark, reinforced undershirt and the remains of his green tactical pants, though someone had taken the time to bind his bruised ribs and wrap a clean, pale linen bandage around a laceration on his left thigh. They treated my wounds, he thought, his analytical mind immediately kicking into gear. Why? If they were villains, they would have restrained me immediately, or worse. The woman. Malenia. She ordered them not to break my limbs. Deku swung his legs over the side of the lounge and let his bare feet touch the floor. It was made of polished stone, cold but immaculately clean. He stood up, testing his balance. Aside from profound exhaustion, he was functional. He took his first real look around the room. It wasn't a dungeon cell, but it was undoubtedly a cage. The chamber was massive, easily the size of a gymnasium back at UA High. The architecture was stunning, a blend of Gothic arches and sweeping, organic curves that looked as though they had been grown rather than built. Immense roots, thick as ancient oak trunks, wove through the masonry of the walls and ceiling, glowing with a faint, bioluminescent golden sap. Elaborate tapestries hung from the walls, depicting tall, elegant figures, massive trees, and holy insignias that meant absolutely nothing to Deku. Yet, for all its grandeur, the room was steeped in a heavy, inescapable melancholy. The tapestries were frayed at the edges. The golden light was dim, almost suffocated by the pervasive, misty fog that seemed to seep through the very stones. And in the corners of the room, creeping up the beautiful masonry like a vile parasite, was the crimson rot. Deku walked cautiously toward the massive arched window at the far end of the room. There was no glass, only an intricate iron lattice that served as bars. He gripped the cold iron and looked out. His breath hitched. The view was staggering. He was looking out over the interior of the brace of the halig tree. From this vantage point, he could see the impossible scale of the place. Sweeping walkways, towering cathedrals, and massive defensive walls cascaded downward in a dizzying spiral, all cradled within the branches of the dying, colossal tree. But everywhere he looked, the golden majesty was infected. Rivers of a thick, bubbling scarlet swamp pooled at the base of the structure. The air outside was thick with floating, luminous spores. It's beautiful, Deku thought, a knot forming in his stomach. But it's suffering. The whole city is slowly dying. It is a place of profound decay. Ninth, Deku flinched, instinctively dropping into a defensive stance, his fists raised. But there was no one in the room with him. The voice had come from inside his head. Ease your heart, kid. A second, gruffer voice echoed. It's just us. You took a hell of a hit coming through that rift. Knocked our connection out for a few hours. Deku relaxed, pressing a hand to his forehead. Banjo? First? Are you guys okay? What happened to Shigaraki? What happened to the others? Inside the dark, swirling void of One for All, the vestiges sat in their respective chairs. The first user, Yoichi Shigaraki, looked up at Deku with sympathetic, glowing eyes. The singularity tore the fabric of your dimension, Izuku. Yoichi explained gently. The clash of your stockpiled energy and his localized decay created a localized wormhole. You were pulled through. As for Tamura Shigaraki, we do not know. The connection to your world was severed the moment the rift closed behind you. Deku felt the blood drain from his face. He leaned heavily against the iron lattice, his knees suddenly weak. Severed? You mean? I can't go back? My mom. All Might. Uraraka, Todoroki, Bakugo. I just left them there? We don't know if it's permanent. Nana Shimura's voice chimed in, filled with a motherly warmth. But right now, panicking won't help them, and it certainly won't help you. You need to focus on surviving wherever we are. This place, the ambient energy here is strange. It's heavy. It feels like magic, but corrupted. Deku took a deep, shuddering breath. Nana was right. Freaking out wouldn't solve anything. He was a hero. Heroes assessed the situation, found the people in trouble, and acted. Right now, he was a prisoner in an unknown world, surrounded by a dying army and ruled by a woman with a prosthetic arm and a sword that could cut through him like butter. Speaking of the locals, the fourth user, Shinomori, warned. Company's coming. 3 presences. One of them is her. Deku pushed himself away from the window and stood in the center of the room. He wiped his sweaty palms on his shredded pants and forced his posture to remain neutral, yet alert. He didn't activate One for All, not wanting to provoke them, but he kept the embers of the power close to the surface, ready to ignite if things went south. A heavy mechanical clunk echoed through the chamber, as the massive wooden doors groaned inward. 2 clean-wrought knights stepped into the room first. They were just as imposing as the ones on the bridge, their golden armor tarnished with rot, their long, wicked scythes held at the ready. They flanked the doorway, standing at rigid attention. Then she entered. Malenia, Blade of Miquella, moved with a grace that seemed entirely at odds with the heavy metal she wore. She had removed her winged helm, allowing Deku to see her face for the first time. She was devastatingly beautiful, yet utterly terrifying. Her skin was a pallid, porcelain white, save for the right side of her face and neck, where the flesh was marred by deep, cracked fissures of the scarlet rot. A bloom of the crimson fungus grew dangerously close to her right eye, which was clouded and unseeing. Her left eye, however, was sharp, piercing, and the color of tarnished gold. A cascade of long, somewhat unkempt auburn hair flowed down her back, a stark contrast to the cold metal of her armor. Her right arm, the prosthetic of unalloyed gold, hummed with a faint, intricate mechanical whir as she moved. The massive katana was still attached to the wrist joint, resting casually at her side, though Deku knew she could swing it faster than the speed of sound. She stopped a few paces away from him, her solitary golden eye analyzing him from head to toe. She seemed to be looking for a weapon, a hidden great rune, or some sign of deceit. She found only a heavily scarred, exhausted teenager with messy green hair. You have awoken, she stated. Her voice, without the helm to muffle it, was clearer, though it still carried the dry, raspy undertone of someone whose lungs were constantly battling an infection. To Deku's relief, the words instantly translated in his mind, thanks to the vestiges. Yes, Deku said softly. He offered a respectful, deep bow, a starkly Japanese custom that made the clean-wrought knights shift their sides uneasily. Thank you for treating my injuries. And, thank you for not killing me on the bridge. Malenia did not return the bow. She simply observed it, her expression unreadable. You bow like a servant, yet you fight with the ferocity of a lord. You are a contradiction, Izuka Midoriya. She gestured with her golden hand toward a heavy oak table and 2 high-backed chairs near the center of the room. Sit. We will speak. Deku complied, pulling out a chair and sitting down, keeping his hands visible on the tabletop. Malenia sat across from him. The sheer size difference was apparent. Even seated, she loomed over him. The 2 knights remained at the door, silent and statuesque. Tell me, Malenia began, her tone devoid of warmth, pure interrogation. From what land do you hail? You bear no grace in your eyes. You are not tarnished. You do not reek of the Erdtree, nor do you carry the stench of the formless mother or the fell gods of the mountain tops. Yet the power you displayed, it shattered unalloyed gold and dispersed the rot. What is the nature of your strength? Deku swallowed hard. How was he supposed to explain the concept of quirks, modern society, and multidimensional travel to a medieval warlord? Tell her the truth, ninth, Yoichi whispered. But frame it in a way she might understand. She is a warrior. Speak of inherited will. I'm not from this world, Deku started, deciding honesty was the best policy. Where I come from is called Earth. Specifically, a country called Japan. It's very far away. I don't think you could reach it by traveling. I was in the middle of a battle against a very dangerous man, and our powers collided. It tore a hole in the sky, and I fell through. I ended up here, in your tree. Malenia's golden eye narrowed fractionally. Another world. The stars have been halted by Radon, yet a rift opened. A bold claim. And this power of yours? This magic? It's not magic, Deku said, tapping his fingers nervously on the table. Where I'm from, almost everyone is born with a special ability. We call them quirks. Some people can breathe fire, some can fly, some can move objects with their minds. It's a biological trait, like having a certain eye color. Malenia leaned forward slightly, resting her organic left hand on the table. The digits were long, elegant, but marred by the creeping discoloration of the rot. A world where all are born with inherent power. A world of lords. No, not lords, Deku corrected quickly. Just normal people. But, because people have power, some choose to use it to hurt others. To take what they want. We call them villains. And what of you? Malenia asked softly. You struck down my knights without drawing a blade. You spoke of an order. You called yourself a hero. Deku nodded, a spark of his usual passion igniting in his chest. Yes. A hero. In my world, heroes are people who use their quirks to protect others. To stop the villains. We don't fight to conquer or to rule, we fight to save people. That's my dream. To be a hero who can save everyone with a smile. Silence descended upon the room. The thick, misty air seemed to grow heavier. Malenia stared at him. For a long time, she said nothing. Then, a sound escaped her lips. It was dry, harsh, and utterly devoid of humor. It took Deku a second to realize she was laughing. It was a dark, hollow sound. To save everyone, Malenia repeated, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. To fight not for great runes, not for the Elden Ring, not to establish an order, but simply to save. You are either a madman, Izuku Midoriya, or you are a child playing a very dangerous game. Deku frowned, feeling a flare of defensiveness. It's not a game. I've given everything for this. People need to be saved. Look out that window, Malenia commanded, her voice suddenly sharp, slicing through the air like her katana. She pointed a golden, prosthetic finger toward the iron lattice. Look at Elfiel. Look at the halig tree. This was supposed to be a haven. My brother, Miquella, grew this tree to save those who were shunned by the Golden Order. The misbegotten, the Albinaurics, the diseased. He wanted to save everyone, just like you. Deku looked toward the window, then back to her. He saw the profound sorrow lurking beneath her fierce exterior. What happened? The world happened, Malenia said coldly. The outer gods do not care for havens. The Golden Order does not tolerate defiance. The rot within me, it bloomed. It corrupted this tree. It corrupted my knights. My brother is gone, taken from me, and now I sit at the roots of a dying sanctuary, waiting for a battle that will inevitably consume us all. She leaned in, her golden eye locking onto his green ones. The sheer intensity of her gaze made Deku's breath catch. In the lands between, Izuku Midoriya, there are no heroes. There is only power, and those who are subjugated by it. If you fight only to save, you will be slaughtered. Kindness is a weakness that the demigods will exploit, butcher, and leave to rot. Deku met her gaze. He felt the crushing weight of her despair. He could see that she truly believed what she was saying. She had lived a life of constant warfare, defined by a rotting curse she couldn't control, fighting in a world that wanted her dead. But Deku had grown up quirkless in a superhuman society. He knew what it was like to be told to give up. He knew what it was like to face impossible odds. I respectfully disagree, Deku said, his voice quiet but forged of pure, unbreakable steel. Malenia blinked, surprised by the sudden shift in his demeanor. The nervous, stuttering boy was gone. In his place sat a warrior with eyes that held the same terrifying, unyielding resolve as the greatest generals she had ever faced. I've been told before that I couldn't be a hero, Deku continued, his hands clenching into fists on the table. I've been told I was weak. I've had my bones shattered, my muscles torn apart, and I've watched people I love get hurt. I know that kindness can be exploited. I know that saving people hurts. He reached out and grabbed the shredded remains of his sleeves, gripping the fabric tightly. You asked about the nature of my power, Deku said. You asked how I shattered your knight's weapons. It's not magic. It's a power passed down from person to person, accumulating strength over generations. It's called One for All. But it comes with a price. Because my body wasn't built for it. Deku took a deep breath, and slowly, deliberately, he rolled up the tattered sleeves of his undershirt, baring his arms to her. Malenia, who had seen horrors beyond mortal comprehension, who had witnessed the mountains of corpses and the shattering, felt a genuine shock ripple through her. Deku's arms were catastrophically disfigured. From the wrists up to the biceps, the flesh was a roadmap of violent trauma. The skin was mottled with deep, jagged purple and pink scars, branching out like lightning strikes. The muscles beneath the skin looked warped, healed improperly after being torn to shreds time and time again. The right arm was noticeably worse, the joints visibly stiff, the scarring so dense it looked less like human skin and more like melted wax over twisted iron. These were not the scars of a sword, or a beast, or a spell. These were the scars of a body that had violently ripped itself apart from the inside out, over and over and over again. You! Malenia breathed, her stoic facade slipping for a fraction of a second. She reached out with her organic hand, stopping just inches from his scarred forearm, as if afraid that touching it would cause it to shatter. You did this to yourself? Yes, Deku said softly, looking down at his arms. To save people. When I couldn't control the power, I had to break my own body to use it. I've lost count of how many times I've shattered my arms, my legs, my ribs. My doctor told me if I kept doing it, I would lose the ability to use my arms forever. He looked back up at her, his green eyes glowing with a quiet, undeniable light. So, please don't tell me I don't understand the cost of saving people. I wear the cost every day. Malenia slowly retracted her hand. She looked from his mutilated arms to her own body. She looked at her prosthetic right arm, forged of unalloyed gold to replace the flesh that the scarlet rot had eaten away. She looked at the heavy gold greaves that served as her legs. For her entire life, she had believed she was utterly alone in her suffering. She was the vessel of the rot, cursed from birth, her body slowly eroding away, replaced by cold metal. She fought because she was a blade, a tool forged by tragedy. But looking at this boy, this alien from another world, she saw a mirror. He was not cursed by an outer god, but he was cursed by his own conviction. He had willingly destroyed his own flesh, turning his body into a shattered vessel, simply to uphold a vow. He was missing pieces of himself, just as she was. You are a fool, Malenia said again, but this time, the venom was gone from her voice. It was replaced by a strange, quiet reverence. To sacrifice your own flesh for those who will inevitably turn to dust. It is a man's errand. Maybe, Deku smiled, a genuine, warm smile that seemed entirely out of place in the gloomy Elfeel. But I'm still here. I still have my arms. And you still have your sword. He gestured toward her golden arm. Your prosthetics. They're incredible. The articulation, the way they connect to your nervous system, it's beyond even the support gear at my school. Did your brother make them? The sudden shift in topic caught Malenia off guard. Yes, she answered, glancing down at her golden gauntlet. Miquella forged them. Unalloyed gold. It is the only metal that can stave off the rot. It wards off the meddling of the outer gods. Deku leaned in, his inner fanboy momentarily overriding the tense situation. It wards off corruption. That's amazing. So it acts as an insulator against external magical interference? The tensile strength must be off the charts to support your combat speed. Do you have to maintain the joints with oil, or is it a self-lubricating mechanism driven by your own? Malenia blinked. The rapid-fire string of questions, delivered with such wide-eyed, innocent enthusiasm, completely derailed her train of thought. For a moment, she didn't know how to respond. No one had ever asked her about the mechanics of her limbs. They only ever looked at them with fear or pity. It requires little maintenance, she managed to say, feeling a bizarre, foreign sensation welling up inside her. Was it amusement? The gold is eternal. It does not rust. Fascinating, Deku muttered, clearly wishing he had one of his scorched notebooks. And the blade is integrated directly into the wrist housing. That sacrifices rotational mobility but maximizes the kinetic force of your swings. That explains your stance on the bridge. Malenia felt a small, almost imperceptible smirk tug at the corner of her unrotted lips. You possess a keen eye for a madman. You analyzed my technique in the brief moments before you surrendered? I analyze everything, Deku said, tapping his temple. It's how I survive. I have to know how things work. How people fight. It helps me figure out how to stop them without killing them. The smirk vanished, replaced by the somber reality of her existence. There are things in this world that cannot be stopped without death, Izuku Midoriya. If you hold on to your naive vow of pacifism, you will die here. I've killed before, Deku said softly. The memory of the monstrous Nomu, of the hollow husks of villains he had been forced to put down, flashed through his mind. I don't refuse to do it out of arrogance. I refuse to do it because life is precious. If there is another way, I will always take it. Malenia studied him. And if there is no other way, then I do what I have to do, Deku said, his voice dropping an octave. To protect the people standing behind me. For a long moment, the demigod and the hero simply looked at each other. Two warriors from different universes, bound by the scars they carried and the burdens they bore. The heavy, oppressive atmosphere of the room seemed to lighten, just a fraction. Then, the rot intervened. It happened without warning. 1 second, Malenia was sitting tall, a regal commander in control of the room. The next, a violent, wet cough ripped out of her chest. She doubled over, slamming her organic hand onto the heavy oak table. The wood splintered under the force of her grip. A sickening, wet tearing sound echoed through the chamber, followed by a choked gasp of absolute agony. Malenia? Deku cried out, half rising from his chair. The two clean-wrought knights at the door immediately sprang forward, their armor clanking loudly, but they stopped a few feet away, seemingly paralyzed. They knew they couldn't touch her. To touch her during a spasm was to invite the pure, undiluted scarlet rot into their own bodies. Malenia was hyperventilating, her golden eyes squeezed shut in pain. Beneath the collar of her dress, on her neck and chest, the crimson fungus was rapidly expanding, blooming violently. The veins on her pale skin turned a toxic, glowing orange. It was as if the disease was trying to physically claw its way out of her body. Stay back. Malenia rasped, gritting her teeth so hard it sounded like stone grinding against stone. She clutched her chest, her unalloyed gold arm trembling violently. Do not approach. Deku didn't listen. His eyes widened as he saw the pure, unadulterated suffering radiating from her. Danger sense was screaming, warning him that the air around her was turning toxic, that the spores blooming from her skin were lethal. Ninth, wait! That substance is pure necrosis. It will eat you alive! Banjo yelled in his mind. I don't care. Deku yelled back. She's in pain. Deku's body moved before his brain could rationalize the danger. It was the core instinct that made him a hero, the inability to stand by and watch someone suffer. He didn't activate full cowl. The lightning would only destroy the room. Instead, he reached into the core of One for All, isolating the quirk of the third user, Fa gene. Deku built up the kinetic energy in his legs in a fraction of a second. He kicked off the floor, launching himself across the table. The table completely pulverized beneath his feet from the sheer force of the launch. Get away from her! One of the clean-wrought knights bellowed, swinging his heavy scythe forward to intercept Deku. Deku didn't even look at the knight. He twisted his body midair, dodging the lethal blade by millimeters, and landed directly beside Malenia's chair. The heat radiating off her was immense, like standing next to an open furnace. The smell of the rot was intoxicating and putrid, burning Deku's nostrils and making his eyes water. He could see the fungus rapidly spreading across her collarbone, eating away at the flesh. She was falling out of her chair, her body seizing as the outer god's curse ravaged her internal organs. I've got you, Deku said, his voice calm and firm. He caught her. He wrapped his scarred, mutilated arms around her trembling body, pulling her heavy, armored form against his chest, refusing to let her hit the floor. The moment his bare skin touched the blooming rot on her neck, an agonizing, burning sensation flared up his arms. It felt like acid was being poured directly onto his veins. The scarlet rot immediately tried to invade his flesh, seeking to corrupt and consume. Izuku! Nana screamed in his head. Deku gritted his teeth, his eyes flashing with a brilliant, blinding emerald light. No, Deku thought, his willpower hardening into an unbreakable diamond. You will not hurt her. He tapped into the deepest, purest reservoir of One for All. He didn't use it for strength, or speed, or destruction. He used it for what it truly was, the stockpiled, crystallized essence of pure life force and human willpower, cultivated by 9 generations of heroes. He flooded his own body, and by extension the skin touching hers, with the golden green energy. One for All, full cal, 45%. Emerald lightning erupted from Deku's body, wrapping around both him and Malenia in a swirling vortex of energy. When the pure life force of One for All collided with the entropic, decaying nature of the scarlet rot, the reaction was instantaneous. The air in the room cracked like thunder. To Malenia, drowning in the blinding agony of her own rotting blood, it felt as though someone had suddenly plunged her into a cool, crystal-clear lake. The burning stopped. The suffocating pressure in her chest vanished. Her golden eye snapped open. She was pressed against the chest of the strange boy from another world. His arms, those horribly scarred, broken arms, were wrapped around her with an iron grip. Brilliant green lightning cascaded around them, bathing the dark room in an ethereal glow. She looked down at her chest. The blooming crimson fungus was physically recoiling, shrinking back, suppressed by the sheer, overwhelming purity of the energy coursing through the boy. For the first time since she was born, for the first time in centuries of agonizing existence, the scarlet rot was quiet. Malenia looked up, her breath catching. Izuku Midoriya was staring down at her, his face strained, sweat beading on his forehead as he fought the disease with his own life force. He was in pain, taking her burden onto himself, yet his green eyes were filled with nothing but fierce, unyielding compassion. It's going to be okay, Deku whispered, his voice shaking from the effort, but his grip never faltering. I'm here. Malenia, the undefeated blade of Miquella, the terror of the shattering, lay in the arms of the boy from Earth, completely and utterly speechless. The collision of 2 fundamentally opposing forces within the dim, heavy atmosphere of the chamber did not create a localized explosion, but rather an absolute, earth-shattering shift in reality. To Izuku Midoriya, the sensation of touching the raw, unfiltered scarlet rot was unlike any pain he had ever endured. He had felt the crushing pressure of Muscular's overwhelming physical force, the searing heat of Todoroki's flames, and the bone-shattering recoil of his own quirk. But this was different. This was not blunt trauma or thermal burns. The moment his bare, scarred forearms pressed against the blooming crimson fungus on Malenia's chest and neck, he felt an invasive, parasitic sentience trying to burrow into his very soul. It felt as though millions of microscopic, razor-sharp hooks had latched onto his skin, attempting to inject a venom that demanded nothing less than the total, entropic breakdown of his cellular structure. The air around them grew thick, suffocating, smelling of ancient, sweet decay and copper blood. His danger sense was no longer a vibration in his skull. It was a deafening, continuous siren of apocalyptic warning. Izuku! Let go! It's eating through your aura! Daigoro Banjo roared from the depths of the vestige realm, his spectral form straining as if trying to physically pull the boy away. This isn't a quirk! It's not human! Shinomori, the 4th user, shouted, grasping his head as the sheer malice of the rot flooded their shared consciousness. It's a conceptual malignancy. It wants to melt everything down to sludge. I can't let go. Deku screamed back, his physical teeth grinding together so hard his jaw ached. She's dying. I can feel it. I won't let it take her. He tightened his grip on the towering demigod. His arms, wrapped securely around Malenia's back and shoulders, began to shake violently. He closed his eyes, digging deep, past the pain, past the fear, straight to the glowing, sunlight core of One for All. For 9 generations, the power had been cultivated. It was born from a frail man's desire to stop his tyrannical brother. It had been passed down, nurtured by the blood, sweat, and indomitable wills of men and women who threw themselves into the fire to save others. It was the absolute antithesis of decay. It was accumulation. It was kinetic motion. It was life. Then use everything, 9th! Yoichi Shigaraki commanded, stepping into the light of the inner realm, his white hair billowing. Show this rot the crystallized will of humanity. Do not hold back, one for all, full cow, 45%. Deku bellowed aloud, the sound tearing from his throat in a raw, primal cry. Emerald lightning, thick as braided steel cables, violently erupted from Deku's core. The sudden discharge of pure, stockpiled kinetic and life energy shattered the remaining stone tiles beneath their feet. The shockwave blew the heavy tapestries completely off the walls, sending the two clean-rot knights stumbling backward, their heavy sides clattering against the masonry. The green energy cascaded over Deku's skin, but it didn't stop there. It arced wildly, immediately surging into Malenia's body. What happened next defied the very laws of the lands between. Malenia, Blade of Miquella, had lived her entire, unimaginably long life in a state of perpetual, burning agony. Since the moment she and her twin brother were born of a single god, the outer god of rot had laid claim to her flesh. Her existence was a waking nightmare of phantom pains, rotting marrow, and the sensation of her own blood slowly turning to venom. The only respite she had ever known was the cold, numbing ward of her brother Miquella's unalloyed gold, which merely halted the decay. It never pushed it back. It never healed. But as the boy from another world held her, and that blinding, roaring green energy washed over her, the pain simply ceased. It was not the cold, sterile suppression of unalloyed gold. This was a roaring, raging inferno of vitality. The green lightning surged through her veins like a tidal wave of pure, concentrated life force, violently clashing with the dormant spores of the outer god. The crimson bloom on her neck and collarbone, which mere seconds ago had been trying to violently erupt, suddenly shriveled. The sickly, glowing orange veins beneath her pale skin rapidly faded, pushed back by the overwhelming rush of Deku's power. Malenia gasped. It was a clear, ringing sound, entirely devoid of the wet rattle that usually plagued her lungs. Her singular, tarnished gold eye widened in absolute, paralyzing shock. She could feel her own heartbeat, steady and strong, unhindered by the suffocating grip of the rot. The phantom pains in her missing arm and legs, a torment she had silently endured for centuries, vanished entirely. She looked at the boy holding her. Izuku Midoriya's eyes were squeezed shut, his face twisted in a mask of intense concentration and exertion. The emerald lightning danced across his messy green hair and reflected brilliantly against her golden armor. The heat radiating from him was not the sickly, feverish heat of infection, but the warm, comforting heat of the sun. What is this? Malenia's mind reeled, completely unable to process the sensory input. This power, it is not grace. It is not the Erdtree's blessing. It is so heavy, yet so incredibly gentle. She could feel the erratic, terrifyingly powerful thumping of his heart against her chest. She could feel his heavily scarred, ruined hands pressing firmly against her back, acting as a dam against the tide of her curse. He was taking the brunt of the outer god's malice, using his own sheer willpower and this strange, stockpiled magic to physically burn the corruption out of the air between them. For a moment, time seemed to stand completely still. The terrifying demigod and the quirkless boy turned hero were frozen in the center of the storm of green lightning and fading crimson spores. Unhand the Lady Malenia! A booming, distorted voice shattered the moment. The two clean-rot knights had recovered from the shockwave. Misunderstanding the situation entirely, believing the brilliant green energy to be an attack on their weakened master, they charged forward. The heavy, golden rot-stained scythe of the lead knight swung down in a vicious arc, aimed directly at Deku's exposed neck. Deku's danger sense flared, but he couldn't let go of Malenia to dodge. If he broke the connection now, the suppressed rot would violently rebound. He braced himself to take the hit, hardening the muscles in his back with one for all. Clang! The sound of metal striking metal was deafening. Sparks rained down onto the stone floor. Deku opened his eyes. He hadn't been hit. Malenia was standing upright, entirely under her own power. Her organic left arm was wrapped protectively around Deku's shoulder, pulling him slightly behind her. Her right arm, the unalloyed gold prosthetic, was raised. The massive, 7-foot katana integrated into her wrist had intercepted the clean-rot knight's scythe with effortless, terrifying precision. The knight froze, dropping to his knees instantly, realizing he had just struck his commander's blade. My lady! We thought the outsider was. Silence, Malenia commanded. Her voice did not rattle. It did not wheeze. It rang out through the grand chamber with the crystal clear, imperious authority of a true Empyrean. The sheer acoustic difference was so staggering that both knights immediately lowered their heads to the floor, their armor clattering in submission. Malenia slowly lowered her golden arm, the massive blade sliding seamlessly to rest at her side. She took a deep breath, savoring the utterly alien sensation of her lungs expanding without pain. She turned slowly to face Deku. The boy had deactivated his power. The green lightning faded into the gloomy air, leaving behind the smell of ozone and rain. Deku stumbled backward, his legs suddenly turning to jelly. The adrenaline crash hit him like a freight train. He fell hard onto his hands and knees, gasping for breath, sweat dripping from his chin onto the stone floor. He immediately looked at his arms, terrified that the rot had infected him. The skin on his forearms was red and blistered, looking like a severe sunburn, but the horrifying crimson fungus had not taken root. The sheer, kinetic output of One for All at 45% had acted as a perfect sterilizing agent, burning away the physical spores before they could breach his bloodstream. You! Malenia breathed softly, stepping toward him. Her heavy, golden sabatons clicked gently against the stone. She stopped right in front of him, her towering form casting a shadow over his exhausted body. Deku looked up, panting heavily. Are you okay? The spasm. Did it stop? Malenia did not answer immediately. She reached up with her left hand and touched her own neck. Where there had once been a thick, scaly patch of rotting flesh and blooming fungus, the skin was now smooth, pale, and cool to the touch. The dark, corrupted veins had retreated beneath the surface. It was not a cure. She could still feel the deep, primordial slumber of the outer god within her marrow, but the active decay had been completely violently pushed back into dormancy. She looked down at the boy on the floor. He was trembling, completely drained, sporting fresh burns on his already mutilated arms. He had risked everything, his life, his body, his very soul, to soothe the pain of an enemy commander who had held him prisoner. I've killed before. I don't refuse to do it out of arrogance. I refuse to do it because life is precious. If there is another way, I will always take it. His words from mere minutes ago echoed in her mind. He truly meant them. He was not a politician seeking favor. He was not a tarnish seeking a great rune. He was exactly what he claimed to be, a hero. I am unbroken, Malenia said, her voice dropping to a whisper of profound disbelief. She knelt down, the joints of her golden legs whirring quietly, bringing her face closer to his level. You absorbed the malice of the rot. You pushed it back. How? I don't know exactly, Deku stammered, wincing as he slowly pushed himself up into a sitting position. My power. One for all, it's a crystallization of life force. It's meant to grow, to pass on, to protect. I think the energy of my quirk just naturally repels the energy of your curse. Like two opposing magnets, Malenia stared into his bright, emerald green eyes. They were completely devoid of the madness that plagued her world. They held no ambition for a throne. An idea, desperate and brilliant, sparked in Malenia's mind. For centuries she had fought a losing battle. Her brother Miquella, the most brilliant of the demigods, had forsaken the Golden Order and grown the Halig Tree for the sole purpose of finding a cure for her rot. He had forged the unalloyed gold, but it was only a half measure. And now, Miquella was gone, stolen away from his cocoon, leaving her alone to watch their dream rot from the inside out. But this boy. This Izuku Midoriya. His power didn't just ward off the rot. It overpowered it. If Miquella's unalloyed gold was a shield, this boy's power was a burning sword. Midoriya, Malenia said softly, testing the alien syllables of his surname on her tongue. Why yes? Deku replied, rubbing his blistered arms. Stand, she commanded, standing up herself to her full, imposing height. Deku scrambled to his feet, ignoring the burning ache in his muscles. Malenia turned toward the heavy oak doors, her tattered crimson cape swirling behind her. Come with me. There is something you must see, something you must understand if you are to survive in the lands between. Deku blinked, confused. Where are we going? To the heart of the decay, Malenia replied, not looking back. To the roots of the Halig Tree. She glanced at the two Cleanrot knights, who were still kneeling. Rise. Escort us. If any creature of the rot, or any soldier of the Haligtree, raises a blade against this boy, you are to strike them down. He is under my absolute protection. The knights exchanged a bewildered look through their golden visors, but their loyalty to the blade of Miquella was absolute. By your will, Lady Malenia. They barked in unison, standing and flanking Deku. Deku felt a surge of nervous energy. He was no longer a prisoner, but the situation had rapidly escalated. He jogged slightly to catch up to Malenia's long, purposeful strides. They left the lavish chamber and stepped out onto a sweeping, majestic balcony that overlooked the interior of Elfiel. The sheer scale of the city hit Deku all over again. It was a masterpiece of architecture, a city of layered stone walkways, grand flying buttresses, and towering steeples, all interwoven with the colossal, pale wood of the Haligtree. But as they walked, the tragedy of the place became overwhelmingly apparent. The deeper they descended into the city, using massive, gear-driven wooden elevators and sloping spiral staircases, the worse the corruption became. Deku's eyes darted everywhere, his hero instincts analyzing the disaster zone. He saw soldiers, more clean-wrought knights and foot soldiers in gilded armor, huddled around faint, glowing braziers. Their armor was rusted and caked in rot. Many of them were coughing uncontrollably, missing limbs, or slumped against the beautiful masonry, waiting for an agonizing death. This is awful, Deku muttered, horror lacing his voice. They're all infected. Can't they leave? Can't they get medical help? There is no help, Malenia answered coldly, though there was a profound sadness beneath the ice. The Haligtree was meant to be their sanctuary. They came here because they were cast out from the lands bathed in the Erdtree's grace. The Albinorics, whose legs fade away. The misbegotten, who are treated as beasts. They sought a gentle world. Miquella offered it to them. They stepped off an elevator onto a massive, root-covered bridge. Below them was a sheer drop into a foggy, crimson abyss. But I brought the rot with me, Malenia continued, her golden prosthetic clenching into a fist. It slumbers within me, but it constantly bleeds into the soil. It infected the roots of the tree. It poisoned the haven my brother built. They suffer because of my existence. Yet they stay. They fight to defend this rotting shell, because they have nowhere else to go. Deku looked at the soldiers they passed. As Malenia walked by, the diseased, dying men and women tried to stand, raising their weapons in weak, trembling salutes. They didn't look at her with hatred. They looked at her with an absolute, fanatic devotion. They love her, Deku realized. Even though her curse is killing them, she fights on the front lines with them. She suffers with them. She is their symbol of peace in a world that hates them. The parallel hit Deku like a physical blow. All Might was the symbol of peace in Japan. He stood tall, smiling through immense, hidden pain, to make people feel safe. Malenia was doing the exact same thing, but in a world completely devoid of hope. She stood tall, fighting through unimaginable agony, acting as the unbreakable blade for a city of outcasts. I understand, Deku said softly. Malenia paused, glancing down at him. You understand nothing of this world, boy. I don't know the politics, Deku corrected, walking up to stand beside her. I don't know what an Erdtree or an outer god is, but I know what it means to carry a burden so heavy it crushes you from the inside out. I know what it means to be a symbol for people who need someone to look up to. Malenia stopped entirely. She stared at him, her golden eye searching his face for any hint of mockery or deceit. She found only a profound, heartbreaking empathy. You! Malenia started, but the words died in her throat. For a warrior who had fought the Star-Scourge Radon to a standstill, she found herself completely disarmed by the earnest gaze of a teenage boy in tattered clothes. Let's keep going, Deku said, offering a small, reassuring smile. Show me the routes. They descended further, past the grand cathedrals and the military barracks, moving into the lower, darker sections of the brace of the Haligtree. Here, the architecture vanished, consumed entirely by nature. Massive, winding routes, some as thick as a Yuri training facility, twisted and spiraled downward. The air grew incredibly hot and humid. The golden fog was replaced by a thick, suffocating red mist. Deku had to activate full call at a low 5% just to keep the toxic spores away from his face. The ambient energy of his quirk formed a thin, protective barrier around his skin. Finally, they reached the bottom. It was a cavernous, subterranean hollow at the very base of the colossal tree. The sight before them was a vision plucked straight from a nightmare. A massive, churning lake of pure scarlet rot bubbled and hissed, giving off a vile, glowing pink light. Rising from the center of the toxic swamp was a gargantuan flower, its petals tightly closed, pulsing with a terrifying, rhythmic heartbeat. It was not a plant. It was a manifestation of the outer god's power. But what drew Deku's eye was not the swamp or the flower. It was the roots of the halig tree that dipped into the lake. Woven into the massive, infected roots was a hollowed-out cavity. Inside that cavity, resting atop a pedestal of pale wood, was a massive, broken pelvis bone, surrounded by torn silk and remnants of unalloyed gold. It was a desecrated cradle. Malenia walked to the edge of the stone platform overlooking the rot swamp. She did not look at the lake. She looked solely at the empty, broken cavity in the roots. "This is the heart of the halig tree," Malenia said, her voice echoing in the cavernous expanse. "And it is empty." Deku walked up beside her, his danger sense buzzing like an angry hornet in his mind due to the proximity of the swamp. "Who was in there?" "My twin brother," Malenia answered, her voice trembling with a mixture of raw grief and boiling, volcanic rage. "Miquella the Kind. He embedded himself into the halig tree, watering it with his own blood, attempting to grow it into a true Ur-tree so that he might finally cure my rot. He slumbered within a cocoon of unalloyed gold." She slowly raised her organic hand, reaching out toward the empty cavity as if trying to grasp a ghost. "While I was away, marching south to fight in the shattering, someone stole him," Malenia whispered, a single tear, the first she had shed in an age, escaping her golden eye and tracing a path down her pale, uncorrupted cheek. "Someone tore his cocoon from the roots. They butchered the halig tree to take him. And without his presence, the tree began to die. The rot took over completely. And I failed my only purpose." Deku felt a profound ache in his chest. He looked at Malenia. She wasn't an undefeated warlord right now. She was a sister who had lost her brother, standing in the ruins of their shared dream. "I've been sitting here," Malenia continued, her voice growing colder, harder. "Waiting for the rot to finally consume me. Waiting for the enemies of the halig tree to breach our walls and slaughter my people. I thought there was no hope left. But then," she turned her head to look down at Deku, "then the sky tore open, and a boy fell into my branches." Malenia fully turned to face him. She didn't look down at him with the superiority of a demigod. She looked at him with the calculating, desperate gaze of a commander who had just been handed the ultimate weapon to turn the tide of a lost war. "Izuka Midoriya," Malenia said, her tone absolute. "Your power repels the outer god of rot. It is a force of pure, untainted life. You said your quirk was passed down to defeat a great evil in your world. I am asking you to use it against the evils of mine." Deku stood up straight, the ambient green lightning of full cowl illuminating the dark cavern, casting heroic shadows across his scarred face. "I don't know how to get home," Deku said slowly, his analytical mind processing everything he had seen. The suffering soldiers. The dying tree. The broken woman in front of him. "I don't know if I can get home. But I can't just sit around and watch people die. If my power can help you, if it can protect these people and push back this disease, then I'll help you." He stepped forward and held out his scarred, blistered right hand. "I'll help you find your brother, Malenia." Malenia looked at his extended hand. In the lands between, oaths were sworn in blood, forged in battle, or bound by great runes. A simple handshake was a gesture so mortal, so incredibly human, that it caught her entirely off guard. Slowly, she raised her organic left hand. Her pale fingers, still slightly discolored from the rot's lingering presence, wrapped around his heavily scarred, calloused hand. His grip was firm. Warm. Grounding. "Then we have an accord," Malenia said softly. She turned back to the two clean-rot knights, who were standing nervously by the entrance of the cavern, keeping their distance from the rot swamp. "Hear me!" Malenia's voice boomed out, the Empyrean authority returning in full force, echoing up the roots and through the stone corridors of the city above. The knights immediately snapped to attention, their armor clanking in unison. "Spread word to the generals. To Finley, to Loretta, to every soldier who still draws breath in Elfiel. Malenia commanded, her golden eye flashing with a renewed, terrifying fire. The despair that had choked her for months was gone, replaced by the indomitable will of the blade of Miquella. The boy known as Izuka Midoriya is no longer a prisoner of the Halig Tree. He is not a tarnish seeking our blood, nor a spy from the Golden Order. She looked down at Deku, her grip on his hand tightening slightly, a silent promise between warriors. He is the honored guest of the Halig Tree, Malenia declared. He bears a power that rivals the Erdtree itself. He will stand by my side. Any who raise a blade against him will answer to my steel. We are no longer waiting to die in this rotting shell. She released Deku's hand and rested her golden prosthetic on the hilt of her massive katana. We are going to take back what is ours. Deku felt a shiver run down his spine, not from fear, but from the sheer, overwhelming presence of the woman beside him. He had fought alongside some of the greatest heroes of his time, Endeavor, Hawks, Murko, but as Malenia, Blade of Miquella, stood overlooking the toxic abyss of her ruined home, radiating an aura of unbreakable resolve, Deku realized something profound. He hadn't just found an ally in this strange, terrifying world. He had found a partner. Inside the void of One for All, the vestiges watched the scene unfold. Yoichi Shigaraki smiled softly, while Daigoro Banjo let out a booming laugh. Well, Banjo chuckled, crossing his ghostly arms. Looks like the kid just got drafted into a holy war. Hope you're ready to play knight in shining armor. 9th. Deku didn't respond to the vestiges. He simply looked up at the colossal, dying tree above them, his fists clenching at his sides. He didn't know what an outer god was. He didn't know who had taken Miquella, but as his One for All pulsed warmly in his chest, keeping the lethal spores of the cavern at bay, he knew one thing for certain. He was Deku. And he was going to save them all. Izuka Midoriya woke to the sound of a distant, mournful choral hum. It was not the jarring, electronic blare of his alarm clock back in his dorm room at Yui High School, nor was it the chaotic roar of sirens that had become the backing track to his life over the past year. It was a hauntingly beautiful, polyphonic chant that seemed to echo from the very wood of the colossal tree surrounding him. He lay still for a long time, staring up at the ceiling of his new quarters. After his display of power in the roots of the Halig Tree, Malenia had ordered him moved from the lavish but isolated holding chamber to a grand suite situated directly beneath her own command post. The room was breathtaking. Sweeping Gothic arches framed a balcony that overlooked the inner sanctum of Elfiel. The bed he lay upon was massive, piled high with silks woven from the Halig Tree's pale leaves. The air here was cleaner, heavily filtered by braziers burning an incense of unalloyed gold and fragrant ghost glovewort, completely masking the pervasive scent of the scarlet rot. But despite the luxury, a heavy, suffocating weight pressed down on Deku's chest. He raised his right hand, staring at the gnarled, twisted scars that wrapped around his knuckles and forearms. I'm really not in Japan anymore, he thought, the reality of his situation finally settling into his bones like cold lead. I'm not even on Earth. I'm in the lands between. Tears pricked the corners of his eyes. He thought of his mother, Inko Midoriya. She had already suffered so much, watching her son break his body time and time again on live television, crying over his hospital bed. Now, her son had simply vanished into thin air. He thought of All Might, his mentor, who had entrusted him with the greatest power in the world. He thought of Bakugo, Todoroki, Uraraka, Ida, all of them still fighting a desperate, apocalyptic war against Tamura Shigaraki and all for one. I left them behind, Deku thought, his breath hitching. I wasn't strong enough to finish the fight, and now I've abandoned them. You didn't abandon anyone, kid! Daigoro Banjo's gruff voice echoed in the void of his mind, accompanied by the mental image of the fifth user resting a heavy, spectral hand on Deku's shoulder. It was a dimensional tear. An act of God, or science, or whatever the hell you want to call it. It wasn't a retreat. Banjo is right, 9th. Nana Shimura added gently. You cannot carry the weight of two worlds on your shoulders. Right now, your friends are fighting their battle. You must fight yours. You made a promise to the woman of this world. You promised to help her. Deku wiped his eyes with the back of his heavily scarred wrist. He took a deep, shuddering breath, forcing the panic and grief down into a locked compartment in his mind. Nana was right. Crying wouldn't open a portal home. Only moving forward would yield answers. He threw off the silk sheets and swung his legs out of bed. His body still ached from the 45% full call output of the previous day, but the UA training regimen had conditioned him to push through muscle fatigue. He needed to get ready. Malenia had requested his presence at the training grounds at daybreak. There was a soft, rhythmic knock at the heavy oak doors of his chamber. "Enter," Deku called out, his voice slightly hoarse. The door creaked open, and a clean-wrought knight stepped into the room. Deku recognized the armor, but this knight lacked the heavy, decaying cape of the others. Instead, she wore a pristine tabard of pale gold and white, and her movements were remarkably fluid, lacking the sluggishness of the heavily rot-infected soldiers. She carried a bundle of clothing over one arm. "Good morning," Deku said, offering a polite bow. The knight paused, clearly unaccustomed to such civilian pleasantries from someone of his standing. She offered a crisp, militaristic salute, touching a gauntlet to her chest. "I am Finley," the knight spoke. Her voice was muffled by the golden, winged helm, but it was distinctly feminine, sharp, and disciplined. "Commander of the Clean-Wrought Knights. Lady Malenia has instructed me to attend to you, Lord Midoriya, and to ensure you are outfitted properly for the spar." Deku blushed furiously, waving his hands in a panic. "Oh no, please. Just Midoriya. Or Deku. You don't need to call me Lord. I'm just a student." Finley tilted her helm slightly. "You purge the rot from Lady Malenia's flesh with a wave of your hand, and you stand beside her as an equal. In the Haligtree, that makes you a lord. I will not disrespect my lady's decree by addressing you as a commoner." Deku sighed, realizing he wasn't going to win this argument. The social hierarchy of the lands between was far too rigid for modern democratic sensibilities. "Okay. Thank you, Finley." Finley walked over to a heavy wooden table and unrolled the bundle she carried. "Your previous garments were damaged beyond repair in your arrival. Lady Malenia commissioned these for you overnight from the Haligtree's finest weavers." Deku approached the table, his eyes widening. Laid out before him was a set of combat attire that perfectly blended the aesthetic of the lands between with his need for high mobility gear. The base layer was a dark, charcoal gray undersuit made of a strangely durable, highly elastic fabric that felt like a cross between Kevlar and silk. Over this went a sleeveless tunic of deep, forest green, a clear homage to his shredded hero costume. But the most incredible parts were the protective elements. Finley presented him with a set of gauntlets and greaves forged entirely of unalloyed gold. They were remarkably thin, contoured to fit his arms and legs seamlessly, held in place by leather straps. "Lady Malenia noted that your combat style heavily relies on your limbs," Finley explained, handing him the greaves. "These are forged of Miquella's unalloyed gold. They will not only provide immense physical protection against blades, but they will naturally ward off any ambient rot or magical incantations you might encounter in the training grounds." "This is incredible," Deku murmured, tracing the intricate, sweeping engravings on the golden gauntlets. He remembered his conversation with Malenia, her noting his scarred arms. She had actually listened. She had given him armor to protect the limbs he so recklessly destroyed. "Put them on," Finley commanded politely. "The lady awaits." 10 minutes later, Deku stood fully dressed. The outfit felt amazing. It lacked the mechanical support of Mei Hatsum's iron saws or mid-gauntlets, but the unalloyed gold was incredibly lightweight, offering zero restriction to his range of motion. He felt like a warrior, a strange fusion of a modern hero and a medieval knight. Finley escorted him out of the chamber. They walked in silence through the breathtaking, sun-dappled corridors of Elfiel. The atmosphere was noticeably different today. The oppressive aura of despair had slightly lifted. Soldiers they passed stood a little taller, their salutes a little sharper. Whispers followed Deku as he walked. The green-haired tarnished, the boy who stopped the bloom, the Lord of Sparks. Deku tried to ignore the stares, keeping his eyes forward until Finley led him out into a massive, open-air courtyard. The training ground was perched on one of the widest, flattest branches of the Haligtree, surrounded by stone balustrades that overlooked the misty expanse below. The ground was paved with interlocking stones, though many were cracked from centuries of use. At the far end of the courtyard, framed by a massive, Gothic archway, stood Malenia. She was a breathtaking sight in the morning light. The golden smog had thinned, allowing actual rays of pale sunlight to filter through the canopy and strike her unalloyed gold armor. She wore no cape today, and her winged helm was absent, her auburn hair tied back into a pragmatic, complex braid. Her prosthetic arm rested naturally on the hilt of her unimaginably long katana. She turned as Deku approached, her singular golden eye sweeping over his new attire. A very faint, almost imperceptible nod of approval graced her features. "You wear the gold well, Izuku Midoriya," she called out, her voice carrying easily across the courtyard. "Thank you, Malenia," Deku replied, bowing respectfully as Finley stepped back to the perimeter to watch. "And thank you for the armor. It's incredibly light." "It is necessary," Malenia replied, stepping toward the center of the courtyard. "If we are to march upon the lands between to find my brother, I must know the exact nature of your combat capabilities. You possess raw power, yes. But power without technique is merely a blunt instrument. Against a demigod, it will get you killed." Deku walked to meet her in the center, his heart rate beginning to elevate. The analytical part of his brain, the part that filled notebooks with hero data, was buzzing with anticipation. He was about to spar with a being who had fought the strongest warriors in this universe. "What are the rules?" Deku asked, stretching his arms, feeling the cool gold of his new gauntlets slide smoothly over his skin. "There are no rules in a true battle," Malenia stated coldly. "But for this spar, the objective is simple. Land a single, decisive blow against me. If you can force me to yield, you win." Deku blinked. "A single blow? But you're using a real sword. Shouldn't we use training weapons?" Malenia drew her blade. The sound of the metal sliding from its scabbard was like a tuning fork vibrating perfectly in the silent air. The blade was obscenely long, over 7 feet of flawless, folded steel that seemed to absorb the light. It was permanently fused to the wrist joint of her prosthetic arm. "I am the blade of Miquella," she said, her tone absolute. "I do not use training tools. My blade is an extension of my soul. But fear not, Midoriya. I have complete control over my edge. I will not sever your limbs, provided you do not act foolishly." Deku swallowed hard. Danger sense was already beginning to hum in the back of his skull, not with malicious intent, but with the sheer, overwhelming lethality radiating from the woman before him. "She's not bluffing, kid," the fourth user warned in his mind. "Her stance has absolutely zero openings. I've never seen a center of gravity so perfectly balanced. Be careful." "Okay," Deku said, exhaling sharply. He widened his stance, dropping his center of gravity. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, calling upon the familiar, warm wellspring of power within him. One for all, full cowl, 8%. Emerald lightning crackled to life, tracing the circuitry of his body, illuminating the unalloyed gold of his armor. The power hummed, a kinetic engine ready to explode. Malenia watched the transformation, her eye narrowing in analytical focus. The energy returns. It is not tied to a catalyst or a staff. It originates directly from his flesh. He treats his own body as the vessel of his incantations. "Whenever you are ready," Malenia said, raising the blade so the tip pointed directly at Deku's throat. Deku didn't hesitate. He needed to test her reaction time. He kicked off the stone floor, the impact cracking the masonry beneath his golden greave. He crossed the distance between them in a microsecond, appearing directly in front of her. He pivoted, throwing a high, sweeping crescent kick aimed at her left shoulder. Shoot style. The kick was fast enough to shatter a concrete pillar, but it hit nothing. Malenia hadn't stepped back. She had simply tilted her torso a fraction of an inch to the right. Deku's golden greave sailed past her ear, missing her by a hair's breadth. Before Deku could complete his rotation and land, Malenia moved. Her prosthetic arm blurred. Clang! Deku gasped, crossing his arms just in time. The flat of Malenia's impossibly long katana slammed against his unalloyed gold gauntlets. The sheer physical force behind the swing was staggering. It wasn't magic. It was purely mechanical kinetic energy driven by a flawless physical technique. Deku was sent skidding backward across the courtyard, his boots grinding against the stone. He barely managed to keep his footing, his arms vibrating from the impact. "She's fast," Deku thought, his eyes wide. "Too fast." and the reach of that sword is insane. I can't get inside her guard with a standard frontal assault. Malenia didn't give him time to think. She advanced. She didn't run, she glided. Her footwork was a mesmerizing dance, completely devoid of wasted motion. She closed the distance terrifyingly fast and unleashed a flurry of strikes. Thrust, horizontal sweep, diagonal slash. Deku was entirely on the defensive. He ducked under a sweep that sheared the top off a stone pillar beside him, then desperately engaged danger sense to weave through a series of lightning-fast thrusts. He couldn't block her edge directly, even with the gold armor. The force would break his bones underneath. He had to parry or evade. You rely too much on your eyes. Malenia called out, her voice eerily calm as she unleashed a relentless assault. Your speed is formidable, but your movements are telegraphed. You think before you step. Deku backflipped away from a thrust that nearly pierced his chest. She's reading my muscle tension, he realized. She knows where I'm going to dodge before I even move. Switch it up, Izuku! Banjo yelled. Make her dance to your tune! Deku landed on his hands and pushed off, doing a double back handspring to gain distance. As he landed, black, crackling tendrils erupted from his forearms. Black whip! 6 thick whips of dark energy shot out, lashing toward Malenia from multiple angles. Malenia's eye widened fractionally in surprise. Dark magic? No, it has physical mass. Instead of retreating, she stepped into the attack. Her blade became a blur of silver light. With a series of precise, surgical cuts, she deflected the heavy energy whips, parrying them as if they were solid steel. But Deku hadn't intended to hit her. He used the deflection to wrap the whips around the massive stone pillars flanking the courtyard. With a violent tug, he ripped 2 massive chunks of masonry free and hurled them directly at her. As the boulders flew toward her, Malenia sliced them in half with a single, elegant horizontal sweep, creating a cloud of dust and debris. That was Deku's opening. He activated smokescreen, flooding the courtyard with a dense, purple fog, instantly blinding them both. From the sidelines, Finley tensed, resting a hand on her scythe. She couldn't see anything. The courtyard was completely swallowed by the unnatural smoke. Inside the smoke, Deku moved with lethal silence. He dropped his power to 5% to minimize the light of his lightning, relying entirely on his danger sense to locate Malenia's immense, lethal aura. He found her standing perfectly still in the center of the smoke. Now, Deku thought. He engaged Fa Gene, releasing the stored kinetic energy in his legs. He burst from the smoke behind her, moving faster than the eye could track, aiming a devastating axe kick right at her blind spot. Malenia didn't turn around. With impossible reflexes, she brought her blade up behind her back, the flat of the steel catching Deku's heel perfectly. The impact echoed like a thunderclap. A clever ruse, Malenia said softly, standing completely unbothered as she blocked a kick that could have destroyed a tank. Obscuring vision to negate my ability to read your muscles. But a warrior of the Halictree does not fight with eyes alone. She twisted her wrist. The sudden shift in leverage threw Deku off balance mid-air. As Deku tumbled, Malenia spun around, her golden leg sweeping his remaining foot out from under him. Deku hit the stone floor hard, the breath knocked out of his lungs. Before he could roll away, the cold, razor-sharp edge of her katana was resting a millimeter from his throat. The purple smoke began to clear, blown away by the wind. Deku lay on his back, staring up the length of the impossibly long blade, straight into Malenia's glowing golden eye. Yield, she said quietly. Deku stared at her for a moment, his chest heaving. Then, a massive, genuine grin spread across his face. Not yet, Deku whispered. Float. Malenia felt the sudden, impossible shift in gravity. The boy beneath her blade didn't roll or push away. He simply fell upward. Deku's body defied physics, floating straight up into the air, completely bypassing the threat of her blade. As he reached a height of 10 feet, he deactivated float, activated full cowl at 20%, and used Black Whip to grab her prosthetic arm. He didn't pull her up. He used her immense weight as an anchor to slingshot himself back down, rocketing toward her like a green meteor, his fists pulled back. Detroit smash! Malenia's eye widened. The sheer unpredictability of the sequence, the flight, the grapple, the immediate counter-offensive, shattered her tactical predictions. For the first time in centuries, she was genuinely caught off guard. She couldn't bring her blade up in time. She was forced to raise her organic left arm, bracing it with her golden prosthetic, to block the incoming strike. Deku pulled his punch at the absolute last microsecond, stopping his fist a mere inch from her crossed arms. The shockwave of the halted Detroit smash, however, still carried. A blast of compressed air exploded outward, shattering the stone tiles in a 10-foot radius beneath them and blowing Malenia's auburn braid violently back. Deku hung in the air for a second, held by his black whip anchor, his glowing green fist poised just in front of her face. Silence descended upon the courtyard. From the perimeter, Finley had unconsciously drawn her scythe, her heart pounding against her ribs. She had never, not once in her entire immortal life, seen anyone force the Lady Malenia into a purely defensive guard. Deku slowly lowered his fist. He deactivated his quirk, the green lightning fading, and dropped lightly to his feet. He released the black whip from her arm and took a step back, bowing deeply. "I yield," Deku said, panting heavily, sweat pouring down his face. I can't keep that level of output up for long." "You're amazing, Malenia. Your technique is flawless." Malenia slowly lowered her arms. She stared at the cracked stone beneath her boots, then looked up at the boy. Her heart, usually a slow, steady, depressed rhythm, was hammering against her ribs. The adrenaline, the pure, unadulterated thrill of a true, unpredictable battle, was something she had not felt since the catastrophic plains of Kaled against General Radon. But this was different. Radon had fought with overwhelming, gravity-crushing brute force. This boy fought with a chaotic, brilliant, multi-layered tactical genius that disguised itself as erratic movement. He utilized his environment, his strange array of magics, and a terrifyingly high battle IQ to create openings that simply shouldn't exist. A slow, breathtaking smile broke across Malenia's pale face. It was not a smirk of arrogance, nor the hollow smile of a political leader. It was the genuine, joyful smile of a warrior who had finally found a worthy dance partner. "You hold back," Malenia noted, her voice carrying a tone of deep, profound respect. "You stopped your strike. The air pressure alone cracked the stone. Had you followed through, you would have broken my guard." "I would have broken your arm," Deku corrected softly, looking down at his own heavily scarred hands. "And I promised myself I wouldn't hurt you." The goal was to land a decisive blow, not a lethal one. Malenia sheathed her long katana. The loud click of the metal settling into the scabbard echoed across the courtyard. "You are a marvel, Izuku Midoriya," she said softly. "You possess the strength of a demigod, yet you restrain yourself with the discipline of a saint. I have never encountered a fighter quite like you. Your footwork is what's crazy." Deku immediately checked out, the hero fanboy taking over as he pulled an imaginary notebook from thin air, making scribbling motions with his hands. "The way you transition between offensive strikes without shifting your center of gravity. It completely negates the telegraphing of your muscles. And that blade, it's so long, but you handle it like a dagger. If I hadn't had my smoke to block your vision, you would have dissected me." Malenia chuckled. It was a beautiful, slightly raspy sound that made Finley, still standing at the edge of the courtyard, blink in pure astonishment. The lady of the halig tree was laughing. "Come," Malenia said, gesturing toward the edge of the courtyard where the massive roots of the halig tree formed a natural, shaded canopy overlooking the mist. "We have sparred enough. My blood runs hot, and my lungs demand rest." Deku nodded eagerly, following her. They sat together on the edge of the stone platform, leaning back against the colossal, pale wood of the halig tree. The cool, damp wind from the abyss below washed over them, a welcome relief against their sweat-dampened skin. Finley quietly approached, leaving a flask of cool, crystal-clear water and a plate of dried fruits beside them before bowing and retreating to give them privacy. Deku took a long, desperate drink from the flask, sighing in relief. He offered it to Malenia, who took it gracefully, drinking deeply. For a long time, they sat in companionable silence, watching the golden fog swirl around the lower branches of Elfiel. The adrenaline slowly faded, leaving behind the pleasant, heavy ache of a hard-fought battle. "You said your power was passed down," Malenia spoke first, breaking the silence. She stared out into the mist, her golden eye contemplative. "From generation to generation. A crystallization of life. Yes, Deku said, pulling his knees to his chest, wrapping his gold-armored arms around them. 9 people have held it before me. I am the 9th. And the man who gave it to you? She asked. Was he a great lord? A demigod of your world? Deku smiled softly, a bittersweet ache blooming in his chest. To me, he was a god. His hero name was All Might. For decades, he was the #1 hero. He was the symbol of peace. In a world where villains with terrifying powers could destroy cities, he stood at the top. As long as he was there, laughing and smiling, people felt safe. He looked down at his scarred hands, but the world didn't know the truth. He had been gravely injured in a fight with the greatest villain of our time. He was slowly dying, his power fading. But he kept fighting. He kept smiling, even when he was coughing up blood, because he knew that if the symbol of peace fell, society would collapse. Malenia turned her head, looking at Deku's profile. The boy's eyes were distant, filled with a mixture of immense reverence and profound sorrow. He chose me to be his successor, Deku continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. Me. A kid who was born completely quirkless. No power at all. I was weak. I was bullied, but I wanted to save people more than anything. He saw something in me. He gave me his power, and he gave me his burden, the burden of a symbol, Malenia murmured, her organic hand tightening slightly against her knee. Yeah, Deku nodded. The expectation that you have to win. That you have to be invincible. But I wasn't invincible. My body couldn't handle the power he gave me. Every time I used it to save someone, I shattered my own bones. I broke my arms, my legs, my fingers. But I couldn't stop. Because if I stopped, people would die. And if people died, I would have failed him. He turned to look at Malenia, his green eyes raw and vulnerable. Have you ever felt that? Deku asked quietly. The feeling that you're not a person anymore? That you're just a tool? A vessel for someone else's hope, and if you crack, the whole world falls apart? The question hit Malenia with the force of a physical blow. She stared into the boy's eyes, and for a moment, the walls of the terrifying, undefeated warlord completely shattered. She saw a boy who had been crushed beneath the weight of expectations, who had literally torn his own flesh apart to satisfy a world that demanded a savior. Yes, Malenia breathed, her voice barely a whisper. She looked away, staring down at her unalloyed gold prosthetic arm. I am an Empyrean, she began, the ancient words heavy on her tongue. Born of a single god, Queen Marika, and King Consort Radagon. By the laws of the Golden Order, my brother Miquella and I were candidates to succeed Marika and become gods ourselves. We were meant to usher in a new age for the lands between. She raised her golden hand, flexing the metal fingers. But we were cursed from birth. Miquella was cursed with eternal youth, forever trapped in the body of a child. And I was claimed by the outer god of rot, a cosmic parasite that sought to use me as a vessel to turn the world into a festering swamp. She lowered her hand, her posture slumping just a fraction. It was the most vulnerable Deku had ever seen her. I never wanted to be a god, Malenia confessed, a profound, exhausting sadness in her voice. I never wanted to rule. I only wanted to protect my brother. He was the only one who truly cared for me. He abandoned fundamentalism, abandoned the Erdtree, all to find a way to cure my curse. He gave everything for me. She looked back up, her golden eye locking onto Deku. So, I became his blade, she stated, her tone hardening. I discarded my own desires. I discarded my humanity. I trained under a blind swordsman until my technique was flawless. When my arm rotted off, I replaced it with a blade. When my legs withered, I replaced them with gold. I marched into the shattering. I slaughtered thousands. I faced Radon and unleashed the bloom of my own curse, damning an entire continent, all to secure Miquella's dream. I am nothing more than the blade of Miquella. If I am not his sword, I am simply a vessel of decay. The silence that followed was heavy, weighed down by centuries of bloodshed and a lifetime of self-imposed dehumanization. Deku didn't offer empty platitudes. He didn't tell her everything would be okay. He understood exactly what she was saying, because he had lived the exact same lie. He reached out. Slowly, carefully, he placed his scarred, gold-armored hand over her organic left hand, which rested on her knee. Malenia flinched slightly at the contact, entirely unaccustomed to physical touch that wasn't an attack. But she didn't pull away. "You're wrong," Deku said softly, his voice echoing with an absolute, unshakable conviction. Malenia looked at him, slightly taken aback. "Wrong? You're not just a blade," Deku said, his green eyes blazing with a gentle, fierce light. "A blade is an object. A blade doesn't feel sorrow for the soldiers who follow it. A blade doesn't sit here and listen to a stranger talk about his fears. A blade doesn't cry when its brother is taken." He squeezed her hand gently. "You're a person, Malenia. A person who loves her brother so much that she sacrificed her own soul to protect him. Just because you fight like a demon doesn't mean you have to be one. You have a heart. I can see it." Malenia stared at the boy. For centuries she had been told what she was. A curse. A monster. A demigod. A weapon. No one, not even Miquella, had ever looked at her and simply seen a person. A strange, unfamiliar warmth blossomed in her chest, entirely separate from the chaotic heat of the rot or the pure life force of his quirk. It was a profoundly human sensation. "You!" Malenia started, her voice catching in her throat. She looked down at his scarred hand resting on hers. "You truly are a fool from another world. Only a fool would look at the goddess of rot and see a victim." "Maybe," Deku smiled, his trademark, sunbright smile returning. "But I've made a living out of being a fool. And right now, this fool is telling you that you don't have to carry the burden alone anymore." He withdrew his hand and stood up, stretching his arms above his head, the green and gold of his attire catching the pale light of the halig tree. He looked down at her, offering his hand to help her up. "You are Malenia," Deku said, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. "And I am Izuku Midoriya. I am your shield, and you are my blade. Together, we're going to find Miquella. We're going to save your people. And we're going to prove to this world that you don't have to throw away your humanity to be a hero." Malenia looked at the extended hand. She looked at the boy's messy green hair, his freckled face, and his eyes that held no fear, only boundless, unyielding hope. For the first time in an eternity, the heavy, suffocating darkness that shrouded her soul cracked, letting in a single, brilliant ray of light. She reached up with her unalloyed gold prosthetic and grasped his hand tightly. "Very well, Izuku Midoriya," Malenia said, allowing him to pull her to her feet. A genuine, fierce smile touched her lips. "Let us show the lands between the wrath of a hero and a blade." As they stood together on the edge of the training grounds, looking out over the misty expanse of Elfiel, the bond between them solidified into something unbreakable. They were two broken weapons, forged in different fires, who had finally found the piece of themselves they had been missing in each other. The march to save Miquella had begun, and the lands between were not prepared for the storm that was about to arrive.